When I first ran away and came here to Seattle, I was tired of being the middleman between my mom and my dad's divorce. I told my mom when I called her about 2 weeks after I got here, I was in trouble with the law. And she understood it, she said, all right, I'll see you when you're 18. And I said, all right, and then about a month later, I called her again. And I said, hey, Mom, how's it going, She says, oh, it's awful, I'm broke. He's trying to drain me, trying to make my life miserable. She started crying a lot and asking me to come home, and I just said, Mom, I gotta go, and I hung up on her.
Sir, you wouldn't have a dime, would you? I need to finish my laundry.
And then I never called her again. I never wrote her a letter or nothing.
I need one more dime.
In 1984, Streetwise emerged as one of the most unsettling documentaries ever made about American life. Not because it sensationalized tragedy, but because it refused to look away from it. Filmed on the streets of Seattle, the documentary follows a group of homeless children navigating a world that is indifferent to their suffering. They panhandle, sleep in abandoned buildings, negotiate with Johns, and share stories of abuse with a matter-of-factness that strips away any comforting illusions about childhood innocence. Directed by Martin Bell and based on the photojournalism of Mary Ellen Mark, Streetwise is less a documentary than a quiet reckoning. It captures the collapse of the social contract in real time, exposing a country that has normalized the invisibility of its most vulnerable citizens. As haunting today as it was upon release, Streetwise forces us to confront the emotional and structural abandonment of youth in crisis, and in doing so, asks an uncomfortable question. What kind of society lets its children vanish into the streets? The origins of Streetwise trace back to a 1983 photo essay commissioned by Life magazine, in which Mary Ellen Mark and journalist Cheryl McCall documented the lives of homeless youth in Seattle. The assignment was prompted by growing public unease over runaway and street-involved teens, a crisis that had been quietly festering under the radar of the era's prosperity. Despite economic growth, federal funding for social programs was being slashed, shelters were under-resourced, and child welfare systems were overwhelmed. Seattle, like many American cities, became a symbol of this duality. Shiny new skyscrapers rising above a neglected underclass. Mark's photographs stunned readers. Her lens captured defiant, broken children surviving in adult worlds of violence and exploitation. One image in particular stood out, a young girl in heavy makeup looking like both a child and a woman. Her name was Erin Blackwell, known on the streets as Tiny. The public reaction to the essay was swift, but fleeting. Mark and her husband, filmmaker Martin Bell, knew that the story couldn't end with a magazine spread. They returned to Seattle with a camera and embedded themselves in the lives of the kids, capturing months of raw footage that would become the basis of Streetwise. There would be no voiceover, no interviews with experts, just the children, their voices, and their world.
For most of the kids on the streets, that's how they survive. They feel like if they don't do the dates, that they're gonna be broke, they're gonna have to dumpster dive, they're gonna have to beg for money, and that's gonna make them feel, because they're girls, like, ooh, I'm no good, I'm dirty, I'm rotten, I'm a scum, I'm living in this rat hole, No water, no electricity, no nothing, I'm begging for money. And I guess they feel that's worse than pulling dates. I don't know what their problem is.
The title Streetwise is more than just a descriptor. It becomes a thematic lens through which the entire documentary operates. While the term typically implies someone who is savvy and experienced in navigating urban dangers, the film complicates this definition by revealing that being streetwise is not a singular state of being, but a hard-earned education with multiple levels. What gives the documentary Streetwise its emotional power is not just the subject matter, but the depth and humanity of its subjects. These are not statistics or composite figures. They are individuals, each with a name, a backstory, and a visible scar. Tiny, whose real name is Erin Blackwell, is the soul of the film. At just 14 years old, she's already working as a prostitute, balancing dreams of being rich with the pain of familial neglect. Her mother, seen in a devastating interview, admits to knowing that her daughter is a child prostitute, but claiming Tiny will do whatever she wants anyway, and this is just a phase. Tiny is one of the most prominently featured kids in Streetwise. She is charismatic, outspoken, and emotionally raw, qualities that make her both compelling and deeply vulnerable. Tiny works as a prostitute in downtown Seattle to survive, sometimes wearing heavy makeup and flashy clothes that mask her youth. Her story reveals a child who has been prematurely forced into an adult world of exploitation and pain. Tiny's life story was later revisited in Martin Bell's follow-up films, especially Tiny, The Life of Erin Blackwell in 2016, which follows her over 30 years. By then, Tiny is a mother of 10 and doesn't even know all the fathers of her children. Tiny is still grappling with poverty, addiction, and the cycles of trauma that began in her youth. Her adult life powerfully illustrates how the scars of street life never fully heal, and how the system never truly helped her recover.
When you get regular dumpsters, we call them regs, you go there every night, you check all these dumpsters, all these different places, and you can tell, because they're regs, what's been there last week and what was put in there that night. Because a lot of people say, well, shit, that shit could be a week old and you can't even tell. But you can, because it's your reg, it's your regular dumpster.
The documentary also features a young boy named Rat, who is one of the more likable and resourceful kids on the street. Rat's story is defined by his independence and a cautious optimism. He doesn't romanticize his life on the street, but he navigates it with a kind of pragmatic resilience that seems way above his years. He doesn't really speak of dreams and goals and just tries to go day by day. What makes Rat's story so poignant is that he represents a rare mix of hardened survivalism and lingering humanity. Someone who hasn't yet been completely broken by the streets, but who's walking a tightrope. He has bonded with other street kids, including his best friend, Dwayne. Rat's relationship with fellow runaway Dwayne shows a bond of loyalty and protectiveness rarely in such hostile surroundings. Dwayne's story is perhaps the most tragic. He is clearly weighed down by emotional trauma of the family he doesn't have. Dwayne, with help from Rat, panhandled, or spare changed, as he called it, to eat each day. With a mom who abandoned him and a father in jail, Dwayne bounced around from abandoned house to sleeping on the streets during his time in Seattle. In one scene, he visits his father, who explains that they are a lot alike. They are both con men and they will eventually make it together. Sadly, Dwayne takes his own life by the end of the documentary while in juvenile detention after being arrested for selling drugs. This is a devastating turn that underscores the emotional toll of life on the streets. His death isn't sensationalized. It's presented with restraint, allowing the audience to fully absorb the weight of it. Dwayne's story exposes the psychological consequences of prolonged abandonment, isolation, and despair. He's a stark reminder that not all kids on the streets are toughened survivors. Some are simply worn down by a world that never gave them a chance. Together, Tiny, Rat, and Dwayne represent different aspects of the homeless youth experience, but they are not the only kids featured. Streetwise immerses us in a bleak urban underworld populated by runaways, hustlers, pimps, prostitutes, and streetwise kids, all navigating a daily war zone most adults wouldn't survive. One of the most devastating undercurrents in Streetwise is the failure of family, the absence, abandonment, or abuse that forces children to seek safety in the streets rather than in their own homes. While the documentary never explicitly frames itself as an indictment of the nuclear family, nearly every story it tells is marked by broken homes, neglectful parents, and a deep longing for connection. The most haunting scenes in Streetwise aren't always those of violence or prostitution. They are moments when children speak matter-of-factly about being unwanted. Tiny, Rat, and Dwayne all express how their relationships with their parents are the reasons why they are on the street, even if they don't explicitly say it. Tiny still speaks to her mom, but her mom is more worried about the money Tiny has made from John's than getting her off the street. Rat explains that the reason he first ran away was because he didn't want to be the middle person in his parents' divorce. When calling back to his mom, Rat reiterates to the documentary that he would rather be on the street than to deal with that. But nowhere is the lack of family guidance more evident than the story of Shelley, where she has turned to her street family to avoid her own. One of the most disturbing scenes in Streetwise features Shelley, a young girl recounting the sexual abuse she suffered at the hands of her stepfather. In a quiet, matter-of-fact voice, she tells her mother about the trauma she endured. But instead of comfort, outrage, or even disbelief, her mother responds with cold indifference, shrugging off the revelation as though it were an inconvenience rather than a life-altering wound. Shelley turns to a fellow prostitute, Patty, and Patty's pimp, Munchkin, who in turn brings her into their lives, but also uses her for money. The film doesn't offer tidy solutions. There are no reunions or reconciliations. Instead, Streetwise leaves us with a disturbing truth. The breakdown of the family unit is not just a private tragedy, it's a public failure. These children were not simply runaways in the rebellious sense. They were expelled, neglected, or forgotten by the very people who were supposed to love them unconditionally. Upon its release, Streetwise quickly captured the attention of critics and audiences alike. The film was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature in 1985, and major publications such as the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times praised its unflinching look at a forgotten population. Though the film sparked temporary public awareness, the structural problems it exposed remained largely unaddressed. Seattle's youth shelter system saw a brief uptick in funding, but nationwide, the documentary became more a cultural touchstone than a catalyst for reform. Many of the children went on to have tragic endings. Patrice, an older teenage pimp who was shown as the tougher leader on the streets, was shot and killed in 2017. Patty, a teenage prostitute in a relationship with her pimp, died of AIDS in 1993. And then there's Roberta Hayes, a girl who was shown throughout Streetwise along with the other street girls, who was the 43rd murder victim of Gary Ridgway, also known as the Green River Killer. In the decades following Streetwise, Bell and Mark stayed in touch with several other of the documentary's subjects. Mark continued to photograph Tiny throughout her life, capturing the cyclical nature of poverty and trauma. As for the filmmakers, their commitment to their subjects went far beyond the frame. They provided emotional support, and in some cases, direct assistance. But their work was always grounded in a refusal to romanticize the suffering they captured. Streetwise does not traffic in sentimentality, it traffics in truth. More than 4 decades after its release, Streetwise remains a devastating portrait of a country that left its children behind. It is both a historical document and a mirror, showing us the consequences of neglect, the resilience of youth, and the dangers of forgetting. Its characters, particularly Tiny, continue to haunt us because they are not just ghosts of the past. They are warnings about the present. Homeless youth still populate America's streets. Systems still fail. And cameras, when wielded with compassion and honesty, still have the power to make us look.